December 12, 1945. Crystal City, Texas. A 28-year-old Japanese military nurse stepped off a truck weighing 68 pounds. The American doctor who examined her wrote in his notes, severe malnutrition, estimated 6 months starvation. 8 weeks later, she would weigh 102 pounds. But the weight that crushed her wasn't on any scale. It was the 6 strips of bacon she ate on December 13th, while her mother, 6,000 miles away in Kyoto, boiled tree bark for dinner. Before we continue this remarkable story, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these forgotten chapters of history. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive for future generations. Her name was Lorna, born Haruna in Osaka, 1917. And this is the story of how bacon eyeglasses and a photograph destroyed everything she believed about the war. The dust rose in lazy spirals under the wheels of the military truck. Texas heat pressed down even in December, a dry weight that made breathing feel like work. Lorna sat in the back, spine straight, despite the exhaustion that had lived in her bones for 7 months. Around her 17 other women, 18 total, prisoners of war, enemy combatants, defeated. 12 of them had cyanide pills tucked under their tongues. Lorna could feel hers, a small, hard capsule pressed against her soft palate. One swallow. That's all it would take. They had been trained for this moment since the day they took the military oath. A captured woman brings dishonor to her family, her ancestors, her emperor. Better to die with dignity than to breathe air under enemy control. The truck slowed. The engine coughed. Through the canvas flap, Lorna glimpsed a fence. Barbed wire catching the late afternoon sun like strings of broken glass. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the wooden bench. This was it. The moment. When the Americans opened the gate, when they dragged the women out for inspection, for humiliation, for whatever cruelty awaited, she would bite down. Quick, clean, over. The truck stopped. Boots hit gravel. American voices low and casual. A gate creaked open, metal against metal, the sound of hinges that needed oil. Lorna's jaw tightened around the pill. Her heart hammered against ribs she could count through her skin. The canvas flap pulled back. Sunlight flooded in, blinding after the dim interior. Lorna squinted, waited for the shouts, the rifles, the rough hands. Instead, a young man in medical whites stood at the tailgate. Blonde hair, sun-weathered face, maybe 26 years old. He looked at the 18 women with an expression Lorna couldn't quite read. Not anger, not disgust. Something softer. "Ladies," he said quietly, "welcome to Crystal City. I'm Dr. Grayson. We're here to help." Lorna didn't understand the words, but the tone made the pill feel suddenly wrong in her mouth. The doctor stepped back, gestured to a building with his clipboard. No one moved. He waited. Still no shouting. No violence. Just a man in white standing in the Texas dust, waiting with the patience of someone who understood fear when he saw it. One by one, the women climbed down. Lorna's legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground. 7 months of malnutrition had turned her muscles to string. She gripped the side of the truck, steadied herself, and looked around. The camp stretched before her like something from a dream. Neat rows of wooden barracks. A garden plot with cornstalks swaying in the breeze. Guard towers, yes, but no dogs. No screaming, no blood-stained walls. Just buildings and sky, and the distant smell of something cooking. A middle-aged woman next to Lorna whispered in Japanese, "This is a trap. They want us to relax before they strike." Takara, 35 years old, former teacher, eyes like flint. Lorna didn't answer. She was staring at a patch of wildflowers growing just outside the fence. Yellow blooms, small and persistent, pushing up through the dry earth. She hadn't seen a flower in 2 years, not a real one. Not something alive and unpicked and blooming for no reason except that it could. Her throat tightened. "Follow me, please." Dr. Grayson's voice still gentle. He turned and walked toward a low building marked with a red cross. The women followed. What choice did they have? Inside the infirmary smelled of antiseptic and something else. Coffee. Real coffee. The scent hit Lorna like a memory of a life she'd forgotten existed. Clean floors, white walls, medical equipment organized on metal trays. Everything precise, everything sterile. Dr. Grayson gestured to a scale in the corner, an old-fashioned balance scale, brass weights stacked beside it. He pointed to Lorna. "You first, miss." She understood the gesture, if not the words, stepped forward, removed her shoes, worn canvas things with holes in the soles, stepped onto the platform. The doctor adjusted the weights, slid the brass pieces along the bar. The needle wavered, searching for equilibrium, finally settled. He looked at the reading, wrote something in his notebook. His pen scratched against paper, the only sound in the room except for the breathing of 18 terrified women. 68 pounds. He wrote it down, POW 247, female, age 28, 68 pounds, critical. Then he did something Lorna didn't expect. He took off his white coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm from his body heat, soft. It smelled like laundry soap and starch. "You're shivering, miss." She was. She hadn't noticed. The coat settled around her like an embrace from a stranger who had no reason to care whether she lived or died. Dr. Grayson gestured to a chair. Lorna sat. He knelt in front of her eye level and held up a penlight, clicked it on, shined it in her left eye, then her right. She flinched. He waited, tried again. This time she held still. "Nearsighted," he murmured. "Severe." He made another note, stood, went to a cabinet and returned with a wool blanket, grey and scratchy, but clean, placed it in her lap. "For tonight," he said. Then slowly, carefully, he put his hand over his heart and said, "Emmett. My name is Emmett." Lorna stared at him. At this enemy soldier who knew her weight down to the pound, but was telling her his name like it mattered. One by one, the other women were weighed. 73 pounds, 82 pounds, 64 pounds, numbers that told a story of starvation and collapse. Dr. Grayson recorded each one without comment, no judgment in his face, just data and blankets and that same quiet patience. When the examinations finished, a guard appeared at the door. Tall man, maybe 32, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and cowboy boots. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. When he spoke, his accent was thick and slow, words drawling like honey from a jar. "Ladies, I'm Guard Calhoun, Wyatt Calhoun. I'll be showing you to your quarters." He tipped his hat. Actually tipped his hat like they were guests at a hotel. Takara hissed under her breath in Japanese, "Theatre. This is all theatre before the torture begins." But she followed him anyway. They all did. The barracks were simple. Wooden floors, bunk beds with thin mattresses. But the sheets were clean. White cotton that smelled like sunshine and detergent. Each bed had a pillow. A real pillow, not a wadded-up jacket or a stone wrapped in cloth. Lorna chose a bottom bunk near the window, sat on the edge. The mattress gave slightly under her weight. She ran her hand over the sheet. Smooth. No bloodstains, no lice, no filth. Outside, the sun was setting, orange and pink bleeding across the Texas sky. In Okinawa, where she had been captured 3 months ago, the sky had been smoke and ash. Here it looked like a painting. Takara sat on the bunk across from her, pulled something small from inside her sleeve, a cyanide capsule in a tiny cloth wrapper. She held it up so Lorna could see. "Tomorrow morning," Takara whispered. "We do it together, before they have the chance to humiliate us." "What if they don't?" Lorna heard herself say. "Don't what? Humiliate us?" Takara's eyes hardened. "They're the enemy. It's what enemies do." Lorna looked down at her hands. Skeletal fingers, nails broken and dirty despite the brief wash they'd been allowed. She thought about the white coat Dr. Grayson had draped over her shoulders, the way he'd knelt to her level instead of looming above. The blanket. "One more day," she said quietly. Let's wait one more day. Takara said nothing, but she put the pill back in her sleeve. That night, lying in clean sheets under a roof that didn't leak, Lorna couldn't sleep, not because of fear, because of the strangeness of comfort. The pillow cradled her head, the blanket held warmth. She could hear the other women breathing in the darkness, some crying softly, some already asleep, exhausted beyond fear. She thought about her brother, Daichi, 16 years old when he died 5 months ago in Saipan. She'd been there. A nurse stationed at the field hospital, she'd watched him come in with a thigh wound that should have been survivable. But there were no antibiotics left, no clean bandages, no morphine. Just her holding his hand while infection turned his leg black and fever cooked his brain. "You'll make it home, sis," he'd said 2 days before he died, delirious, already half gone. "You'll tell Mum I was brave." She'd lied, told him yes, told him she'd go home, but she'd known even then it was impossible. The Americans were winning, the empire was collapsing. Nurses didn't go home. They died with their units or they were captured, and then they died anyway, just more slowly. Except here she was, alive, in a clean bed, and her brother was ash scattered somewhere in the Pacific. The guilt tasted worse than the cyanide pill. Morning came with light through the window and a sound Lorna hadn't heard in 8 months. A rooster, crowing from somewhere beyond the barracks. For a moment, half asleep, she thought she was home in Osaka, in her childhood bed. That the war had been a nightmare and she'd wake to find her father making tea and her mother humming in the kitchen. Then she opened her eyes and saw the wooden rafters, the rows of bunks, Takara sitting up across from her, face hard and ready. A knock on the door. Not a bang, a knock. Polite. 3 taps. The door opened. Guard Calhoun stood there, hat in hand. "Morning, ladies. Breakfast is ready if you're hungry." The word hungry needed no translation. 18 women understood it in their bones. They were led to a mess hall, long wooden tables, benches, windows that let in morning sun, and the smell, God, the smell. Lorna's knees went weak. Bacon. She knew the scent, had smelled it once before the war at a Western restaurant in Tokyo where her uncle had taken the family for a celebration. Pork belly cured and smoked and fried until the fat crisped and the meat darkened. The smell of salt and smoke and something almost sweet. But this was different. This was real. This was now. This was the enemy's food cooking while her mother in Kyoto probably hadn't eaten in 2 days. The women sat, didn't speak, didn't move. Just sat and stared as American cooks brought out trays. Lorna's tray landed in front of her with a soft clunk of metal on wood. She looked down. 3 scrambled eggs, butter still melting into the yellow curds, steam rising like prayer. 2 slices of white bread, toasted golden corners, crisp. 1 glass of milk, cold condensation, beading on the outside. And 6 strips of bacon. 6. They lay across the top of the eggs like a crown. Dark brown, almost red. The edges where the fat had been were translucent, crispy, curled slightly from the heat. The leaner sections glistened with rendered fat. She could see the smoke marks, little char lines from the griddle. The smell was overwhelming. Salt first, then the smoke hickory or maybe mesquite, then something deeper, the caramelization of pork fat and natural sugars breaking down under heat. Then meat, pure animal protein in a way Lorna's body recognized at a cellular level. She hadn't eaten meat in 9 months. The last time had been April 1945. A piece of dried fish the size of her thumb shared between 4 nurses. Her hands were shaking. She picked up the fork, looked at Takara across the table. Takara stared at her own tray with an expression like grief. Around them, some of the women had already started eating. Slow at first, then faster. One woman made a sound half sob, half moan. Another put her face in her hands. Lorna cut into the first strip of bacon. The knife went through easily. She speared the piece with her fork, brought it to her mouth, hesitated. This was wrong. This was betrayal. This was eating the enemy's food while her people starved, while her mother rationed cups of rice, while children in Tokyo picked through rubble for scraps. But her body didn't care about betrayal. Her body knew only one thing: survival. She bit down. The first second was texture, crispy. The outer layer fractured under her teeth, tiny shards of rendered pork fat that had crystallized in the heat. Then the give. The softer meat underneath yielding, releasing juice and oil. The second was salt. It hit her tongue like lightning. After months of under-seasoned rice and boiled vegetables that tasted like nothing, the salt was almost painful. Her taste buds, dormant for so long, woke up screaming. The third second was fat. It coated her tongue, warm and silky. The texture of melted butter, but richer. It spread across her palate, down her throat. Her body recognized it instantly. Calories, energy, life. The fourth second was smoke. The flavor that had been absorbed during curing, during cooking. It tasted like fire and wood and time, like something ancient and essential. The fifth second was sweetness. Just a hint. The natural sugars in the pork fat caramelizing, breaking down into compounds that tasted like maple without the cloying edge. The sixth second was umami, pure savoriness. The concentrated essence of meat that made her brain light up with something between pleasure and pain. Lorna closed her eyes, chewed slowly, swallowed. The bacon went down and her stomach, empty and shrunken, clenched around it like a fist around gold. She took another bite, then another, stopped trying to be deliberate, cut the remaining strips quickly, mechanically, shoved them into her mouth, chewed without tasting, just consuming, getting the food inside before someone could take it away. Strips 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, gone. The plate was empty except for grease. She picked up the toast, used it to wipe the bacon fat from the metal, put the oil-soaked bread in her mouth, chewed, swallowed, licked her fingers. Then the guilt hit. It came up from her stomach like nausea, sharp and acidic and choking. Her mother. Her mother in Kyoto with her ration book that bought half a cup of rice per day. Her mother making soup from radish peels. Her mother going to bed hungry so her neighbor's children could have her portion. And here was Lorna, prisoner, defeated, disgraced, eating 6 strips of bacon from the enemy's table. She stood up fast, too fast. The room tilted. She ran for the door, found a bathroom, made it to the toilet before she doubled over. But nothing came up. Her body refused to surrender the food. Her stomach clenched, trying to expel the guilt, but her muscles wouldn't obey. They held tight, kept the calories, kept the protein and fat and salt, kept the bacon. Lorna sank to her knees on the tile floor, put her forehead against the cool porcelain, and cried. Not quiet tears, real crying, the kind that came from the chest and made sounds like an animal dying. "I'm sorry," she whispered in Japanese. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The door opened. Footsteps. Someone knelt beside her, a hand on her back, warm through the thin cotton of her shirt. Takara's voice, harder than steel, but not unkind. "I know. I ate mine too." They stayed there on the bathroom floor until the crying stopped, until breathing was possible again, until they could stand and wash their faces and return to the barracks with the taste of bacon still coating their throats. That afternoon, Dr. Grayson called Lorna back to the infirmary. She went reluctantly, expecting interrogation, questions about military positions, troop movements, intelligence. She had been trained to resist, to give only name, rank, serial number, to die before betraying her unit. Instead, Dr. Grayson gestured to a chair and held up a small flashlight. The same penlight from yesterday. He shined it in her eyes again, examined them carefully, made notes. Then he went to a cabinet, came back with a small black case, set it on the table between them and opened it. Inside, resting on green felt, was a pair of eyeglasses, wire frames slightly bent, prescription lenses that caught the light. Dr. Grayson picked them up carefully, handed them to her. "Try these." She understood the gesture, took the glasses. They were heavier than she expected, solid, well made. She unfolded the temples and put them on. The world sharpened. Everything that had been soft and blurred suddenly had edges. She could see individual leaves on the tree outside the window, could read the writing on Dr. Grayson's clipboard across the room, could see the tiny mole on his left cheek that she hadn't noticed before. She could see the texture of the plaster walls, the grain in the wooden desk, the individual threads in the American flag hanging in the corner. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen clearly in 3 years. Her glasses had broken in 1942, somewhere in the jungles of the Philippines. Since then, the world had been a watercolor painting, shapes and colors bleeding together. She'd learned to navigate by blur and memory. But now she could see. Lorna looked down at her hands, saw the dirt under her nails, the fine lines in her knuckles, the way her skin stretched thin over bone. She looked up at Dr. Grayson, saw his face properly for the first time. Young, tired, kind eyes with crow's feet at the corners, a small scar on his chin. Human. He was smiling. "Better." She didn't know the English word, but she nodded. Then, without thinking, she bowed. Deep. The formal bow of profound gratitude. The kind you give to someone who has saved your life. When she straightened, Dr. Grayson was still smiling. He pointed to the glasses. "Keep them. They're yours." Yours. She understood that word. Anatta, no. Yours. Nobody should live in a blur he'd written in his notes. Nobody should have to navigate the world half-blind because of a war they didn't start. Lorna touched the frames, adjusted them on her nose. The wire was cool against her skin, solid, real. "Thank you," she said in English. The words felt strange in her mouth, but she'd learned them from a phrasebook before the war. "Thank you." Dr. Grayson's smile widened. "You're welcome, Lorna." Lorna. Not POW 247, not prisoner, not enemy. Lorna. Her name. He'd asked someone how to pronounce it correctly, and he'd learned it, and now he was using it like she was a person who deserved to be called by her name. She walked back to the barracks in a daze. The world sharp around her, every detail visible, every crack in the dirt path, every blade of grass, every face. That night, lying in bed, she took off the glasses carefully, folded the temples, placed them on the small shelf beside her bunk. Takara watched from across the room. "They're buying us." "What?" "With kindness, with food and medical care and glasses. They're buying our loyalty." Lorna was quiet for a long time. Then, "Maybe, but I can see now." 3 days later, on December 17th, they were told to bring their towels to the shower block. Lorna's hands went cold. She'd heard stories from Shanghai, from Singapore, about what happened to women in enemy camps, about delousing that meant shaved heads and public humiliation, about inspections that had nothing to do with health. The 18 women walked to the shower block in silence. Some were crying, others had faces like stone. Inside the room was tiled, white subway tiles from floor to ceiling, steam hung in the air. There were 12 shower heads along one wall, each with a private curtain that could be pulled for privacy. A female attendant stood by the door. American woman, maybe 50, with grey hair and a kind face. She held a basket. "Soap's in here," she said in English, gesturing. "Clean towels on the shelf. Take your time." She left. Actually left. Closed the door behind her and gave them privacy. The women stood frozen, waited for the trap to spring, for men to burst in, for cameras, for humiliation. Nothing happened. Natsumi, the youngest at 22, stepped forward, took a bar of soap from the basket. It was white, rectangular, had letters stamped into it, ivory. She held it to her nose, breathed in. "Lavender," she whispered in Japanese. One by one, the women approached the shower heads, turned the handles. Water came out, not cold, not scalding, warm, almost hot. Lorna stood under the stream and felt 7 months of dirt begin to loosen. The water ran brown at first, then grey, then clear. She picked up the lavender soap. It smelled like her grandmother's garden in Osaka. Like spring. Like a time before war. She scrubbed her skin until it hurt. Washed her hair 3 times. Let the water pour over her shoulders, her back, her face. Let it wash away the Pacific, the jungles, the blood and smoke and ash. Around her she could hear soft sounds. Gasping. Crying. The kind of crying that came from relief so intense, it felt like grief. One woman had sunk to her knees in the shower stall, water pouring over her. She wasn't washing, just kneeling there, letting the warmth soak into bones that had been cold for months. When Lorna finally turned off the water, she stood there dripping, skin pink from heat and scrubbing, clean for the first time since before Okinawa. She wrapped herself in the towel. It was rough cotton institutional, but it was clean and dry, and it was hers to use without asking. In the basket by the door there were clean undergarments, white cotton. Simple, new. Each woman was told to take a set, no charge, no expectation of payment or service. Lorna dressed in the clean clothes and walked back to the barracks feeling lighter, not in body, in something else, some weight she hadn't known she was carrying until it was gone. That evening, as the sun set over Texas and turned the sky the color of peaches, Lorna sat on her bunk and took inventory. Clean, fed, warm, able to see clearly for the first time in 3 years. None of it made sense. The enemy was supposed to be cruel. That's what she'd been taught since childhood. Americans were barbarians, monsters who would torture and kill and desecrate. Everything she'd learned, everything she'd been told had prepared her for suffering and death. Instead, she got bacon and glasses and lavender soap. Lorna reached under her pillow, found the cyanide capsule she'd hidden there on the first night, held it up to the fading light. Such a small thing. One swallow and it would all be over. No more confusion, no more guilt, no more wondering which truth was real. She sat there for a long time, turned the pill over in her fingers. Then she stood, walked to the bathroom, held the capsule over the toilet, hesitated. One more day, she told herself. Just one more day. She put the pill back under her pillow. On December 20th, Dr. Grayson called her in for a follow-up examination. Lorna had been at Crystal City for 8 days. 8 days of 3 meals daily, of bacon and eggs and bread and milk, of clean water and warm showers and sleep without fear of bombs. She stepped onto the scale. Dr. Grayson adjusted the weights. The needle settled. 73 pounds. He wrote it down, looked up at her and smiled. 5 pounds in 8 days. Good. Your body's remembering how to process food. Then he did something unexpected. He said her name. Lorna. She met his eyes. You're going to be okay, he said slowly, carefully. You're safe here. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the tone. She understood safe. For the first time since Daichi died, Lorna felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, thawing, like ice in spring. That night, the women gathered in the barracks after dinner. Someone had found a deck of cards. They played simple games, the kind that needed no shared language, just numbers and patterns and the small pleasure of normal human activity. Takara sat on her bunk, watching, but not playing. She still had her cyanide pill. Lorna knew because she'd seen Takara check for it every night before sleep. A ritual. A reminder that escape was still possible. But tonight, Takara's hand didn't go to her sleeve. She just sat there watching Natsumi laugh as she won a hand of cards. Outside, the December wind picked up. It rattled the windows but didn't find its way inside. The barracks held, kept them warm, kept them safe. Lorna lay in bed that night and thought about home, about her mother, about whether letters were allowed, whether there was any way to tell her family she was alive. But more than that, she thought about bacon, about the way it had tasted, about how her body had refused to give it back even when her mind screamed betrayal. She thought about glasses that let her see the world in focus, about hot water that smelled like lavender, about a doctor who called her by her name. And she thought about the war, about everything she'd been taught, about enemies and honor and the duty to die rather than surrender. None of it fit anymore. The pieces didn't match. The story she'd been told her whole life was crumbling, and she didn't know what would replace it. All she knew was this: she was alive. She weighed 73 pounds. She could see clearly. And tomorrow morning there would be breakfast. One more day, she told herself. Just one more day. But deep down, beneath the guilt and confusion, a small voice whispered something dangerous. What if one more day became one more week, one more month, one more year? What if she wanted to live outside Texas? Stars filled the sky, cold and distant and beautiful. Lorna closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, a future where she might see them without wondering when the bombs would fall. Sleep came slowly. But it came. And for the first time in 7 months, she didn't dream of death. The Texas winter was nothing like winter in Japan. No snow, no frost that turned the world into white silence. Just dry air and pale sun and wind that carried the smell of sage across empty miles. Lorna woke on December 24th to find frost on the inside of the windows, delicate crystals that melted under her fingertip. Christmas Eve. She knew the date because Guard Calhoun had mentioned it the day before his drawl, stretching the words into something musical. The Americans were preparing for their holiday. She could hear it in the kitchen sounds, the extra activity, the anticipation humming through the camp like electricity through wire. The morning weigh-in showed 78 pounds, 10 pounds in 12 days. Dr. Grayson recorded it with visible satisfaction, though he cautioned her about eating too quickly. The body needs time to remember, he'd said through a translator they'd brought in. A Japanese-American soldier from California who spoke both languages with equal fluency. Don't rush the healing. But Lorna's body wasn't interested in patience. It wanted everything. Wanted to rebuild what starvation had stolen. Every meal was a war between guilt and hunger was winning. On Christmas morning, the mess hall served something special. Lorna didn't know the English name. Ham. Thick slices of pink meat with a sweet glaze that caught the light. Potatoes whipped with butter and cream. Green beans. Dinner rolls so soft they collapsed under the weight of her fork. The 18 women ate in stunned silence. This wasn't rations. This was abundance. This was the kind of meal Lorna remembered from childhood, from festivals and celebrations, from before the world narrowed into rice and survival. Takara ate everything on her plate, then looked at the empty dish with an expression like shame. "They're winning," she said quietly in Japanese. "Winning what?" Natsumi asked. The young farmer's daughter had gained weight faster than anyone. Her face had filled out color, returning to cheeks that had been grey with malnutrition. "Us. They're winning us. With this." Takara gestured at the plates. "Food, kindness, making us forget who we are." Lorna adjusted her glasses, a habit she'd developed. "Maybe we're just remembering who we were before the war." Takara's eyes hardened, but she didn't argue. What could she say? That they should have died. That dignity meant starvation. The argument sounded hollow in a warm room with full stomachs. Late December brought a new development. Guard Calhoun appeared at the barracks with something unexpected: seed packets. He spread them on the table like a card dealer. Tomatoes, beans, squash, corn. Through the translator he explained. The camp had garden plots. Prisoners who wanted to could volunteer to plant and tend them. No requirement, no punishment for refusal. Just an option for those who wanted to work with their hands. "Fresh vegetables," he said. "Come spring, you ladies could be eating what you grow." He looked at them with that easy cowboy patience hat pushed back on his head, waiting to see who would step forward. Natsumi's hand shot up immediately. "I know farming," she said in broken English. My father farm, Hokkaido. Wyatt grinned. Well, ma'am, Hokkaido's a far cry from Texas, but dirt's dirt and seeds are seeds. Reckon we can figure it out together. 3 other women volunteered, then 5. Lorna found herself raising her hand almost without thinking. Not because she knew farming, she didn't, but because the idea of making something grow, of putting seeds in earth and watching life emerge, felt like the opposite of war. They started the next morning. The plot was behind the barracks, maybe 40 feet by 60. The soil was different from anything Lorna had touched before. Sandy, dry. Nothing like the wet black earth of Osaka. But when she knelt and pushed her fingers into it, the coolness felt good. Honest. Real. Wyatt showed them how to prepare the beds, how to mark rows, how to plant at the right depth. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who'd worked land his whole life. He moved with economy and grace, no wasted motion, and when he spoke it was in short sentences that the translator could handle easily. Tomatoes like sun. Plant here south-facing. Beans fix nitrogen. Good for the soil. Water in the morning. Evening water brings bugs. Lorna planted her first tomato seed on January 2nd, 1946. Made a small depression with her thumb, dropped the seed in, covered it with soil, patted it down gently. It felt absurd. A Japanese nurse prisoner of war, kneeling in Texas dirt planting food she might never taste. But it also felt right in a way she couldn't explain. By mid-January the garden had become a rhythm. Morning weigh-ins, breakfast garden work, lunch, rest garden work, dinner, sleep. The structure was almost meditative. And slowly, so slowly, Lorna barely noticed the weight of war began to lift. On January 15th, they were allowed to write letters home. The announcement came during breakfast. Through the translator, they were told that correspondence would be permitted. Families could be notified that their daughters, sisters, wives were alive and safe. Letters would be screened for military information, but otherwise would be sent through Red Cross channels. The barracks went silent. Then someone started crying. Then someone else. Within minutes, half the women were weeping. Not from sadness, from the sudden possibility of connection, of telling their families they'd survived. They were given paper. Plain white sheets, pencils, envelopes. Lorna sat at the table in the barracks with blank paper in front of her and no idea what to write. How do you explain this? How do you tell your mother you're alive, well-fed, gaining weight while she's rationing rice and burning furniture for warmth? She picked up the pencil. Put it down. Picked it up again. Finally, she began to write. Dear Mother, I am alive. I am in Texas, America. I am a prisoner, but I am treated well. They give me food every day. Meat, eggs, milk, vegetables. I have gained 12 pounds since December. I can see again. They gave me glasses. I am healthy. I think about you every day. I think about home. I am sorry I could not save Daichi. I am sorry I am alive when he is not. She stopped, stared at the words. The guilt was too raw to hide. She crossed out the last sentence. Tried again. I hope you are eating enough. I hope you are warm. I pray this letter finds you well. Please tell me about home. Tell me about the neighbor's cat. Tell me about the cherry tree in the garden. Tell me about anything that is normal and small and alive. Your daughter, Haruna. She folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, addressed it to Kyoto, to the house where she'd grown up, to a life that felt like something from a story she'd read long ago. Takara was writing too. Her letter was shorter. Lorna couldn't see the words, but she could see the tear stains on the paper. 2 weeks later, in early February, some of the letters had responses. 3 women received thin airmail envelopes with Japanese postmarks. They opened them with shaking hands. Natsumi's father had written. The letter was simple. 3 sentences. We are glad you are alive. Your mother cries with joy. Come home when you can. Another woman received a letter from her sister. They are saying terrible things about you here, that you have betrayed the emperor, but I don't care. I'm just happy you're breathing. The third letter was from a husband. Lorna watched the woman read it, watched her face go white, watched her stand up and walk outside without a word. Later, through whispers, the story emerged. Divorce. Shame. He could not be married to a woman who had dishonored herself by surviving capture. Lorna didn't receive a response yet. Mail from Kyoto took time. She told herself to be patient, told herself her mother was probably fine. But at night, lying in bed, she imagined the worst. Bombing, starvation, illness, the 1,000 ways war killed civilians. On February 20th, Dr. Grayson called her for her regular examination. She stepped onto the scale expecting the usual incremental gain. The needle settled at 102 pounds. Lorna stared at it. From 68 to 102 in 10 weeks. 34 pounds. Her body had remembered how to live. Dr. Grayson was smiling. "That's what I call a recovery, Lorna. You look alive now." He gestured to a small mirror on the wall. "Take a look." She'd been avoiding mirrors, didn't want to see what starvation had done. But now she stepped close and looked. The face that looked back was almost unrecognizable. Cheeks that had been hollow were now filled. Eyes that had been sunken were bright behind the glasses. Skin that had been grey was pink, flushed with health. Her hair, which had been brittle and thin, looked thicker. She looked like herself. Not the self from before the war exactly. Older, changed, but human, alive. Lorna touched her cheek, felt the flesh there, felt the bone underneath but not pressing through, felt evidence of survival. "Thank you," she said in English. She'd been learning words. Guard Calhoun taught her during garden work. Water, sun, flower. Thank you. Dr. Grayson just nodded, made notes in his chart, then looked up. "You're going to make it, Lorna, all the way back." She understood enough to know what he meant, not just physically, all the way back to being a person who believed the future was possible. March brought warmth, real warmth, the kind that made you shed layers and turn your face to the sun. The garden was thriving, tiny green shoots pushing up through the soil, tomato seedlings with their first true leaves, bean plants climbing the stakes Wyatt had helped them set. One afternoon, Lorna stood in the garden watering and realized she was humming. A song from childhood, a folk tune her grandmother used to sing while making tea. She stopped immediately embarrassed, but Wyatt had heard. "Don't stop on my account," he said. "Pretty melody." She didn't know the words pretty melody, but she understood the tone. He liked it. On impulse, she asked through gestures and broken English, "You have flowers, seeds?" Wyatt tilted his head. "Flowers, like for decoration." She nodded eagerly. He laughed. "Ma'am, we're growing food here. Flowers don't fill stomachs." But the next week, he showed up with a small paper envelope, zinnia seeds, yellow, orange, red varieties. "My daughter Ellie," he said, pulling out a photograph from his wallet. "Little girl, maybe 8, blonde pigtails missing her front teeth. She loves these, grows them every summer in Amarillo. Figure if they make her happy, might do the same for you ladies." Lorna took the seeds like they were precious stones. Zinnias. She'd seen them in Osaka before the war, hardy flowers that bloomed all summer even in poor soil. She planted them along the edge of the vegetable beds, careful spacing, proper depth. And as she covered each seed with soil, she felt something shift. She wasn't planting food for survival. She was planting beauty for no reason except that the world needed more of it. Takara came to the garden that evening. She'd avoided it, mostly seeing the work as collaboration with the enemy, but now she knelt beside the zinnia bed and touched the freshly turned soil. "My son," she said quietly in Japanese. "He loved yellow flowers." Lorna said nothing, waited. "He's dead. Killed at Hiroshima. August 6th. Takara's voice was flat, factual, the tone of someone who'd cried all their tears and had nothing left but information. "The bomb. He was 19. "I'm sorry," Lorna whispered. Are you? We killed Americans too. We bombed Pearl Harbor. We massacred in China. Should they be sorry for defending themselves? Yes, they should be sorry. We should all be sorry. War should make everyone sorry. Takara looked at her with something like surprise, then back at the soil. Yellow, she said. Plant more yellow ones. The days stretched longer. Sunset came later each evening, painting the Texas sky in colors Lorna had forgotten existed. Pink, orange, purple, gold. Sometimes she and the other women would sit outside after dinner and watch the light change, and no one would speak because there were no words for the strange peace of it. On March 8th, something happened that changed everything, though Lorna didn't know it yet. It was evening. Dishes done, garden watered. The women were in the barracks mending clothes, playing cards, writing letters. Normal things. Things that had nothing to do with war. Then Lorna heard it. Music. Coming from outside. She went to the window. Wyatt was sitting on a bench near the fence 50 feet away. He had something in his hands. A harmonica. Small and silver, catching the last light. He played slow. A melody that sounded like loneliness and home at the same time. Lorna didn't know the song. Years later she'd learn it was called Red River Valley, an old cowboy ballad about leaving and loss. But she knew the feeling of it, knew it in her bones, the ache of distance, the memory of places you can't return to. Without thinking, she opened the window. The music drifted in, clear and sweet. And then, even more without thinking, Lorna began to sing. Not in English, in Japanese. A different song entirely, Sakura Sakura, the cherry blossom song every child in Japan learned. But the melody was similar enough. The rhythm matched. Her voice and his harmonica wove together like they'd been practicing. Wyatt stopped playing. The sudden silence was loud. Lorna froze. Had she offended him? Broken some rule? Then he started again. Same song, and she sang again, softly, just loud enough for the music to carry. They went on like that for 3 full minutes, a cowboy in Texas and a Japanese nurse harmonizing across a fence, across a war, across every reason they had to hate each other. When the song ended, there was silence. Not awkward. Full. The kind of silence that comes after something true has been said. Wyatt tipped his hat toward her window. Lorna bowed her head. Neither spoke. Language would have ruined it. Behind her in the barracks, every woman was at the windows, listening, watching, even Takara. Especially Takara, standing with her arms wrapped around herself, tears running down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. Late March brought the first letter from Lorna's mother. The envelope was wrinkled, stamped multiple times, forwarded through military channels and Red Cross offices and bureaucratic mazes that took 6 weeks to navigate. Lorna opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My dearest Haruna, we received your letter. Your father and I cried for an hour. We thought you were dead. The official notice said you were missing and presumed killed. To know you are alive is worth more than all the rice in Japan. Do not feel guilty about food. I am eating. Not much, but enough. Your father trades on the black market. We survive. The neighbors say terrible things, that you have disgraced us, that you should have died. But your father told them if they speak ill of his daughter again, he will burn their houses down. They are quiet now. Haruna, I do not care what anyone says. You are alive. That is all that matters to me. Live, eat, grow strong. Come home when they let you. The cherry tree bloomed this year despite everything. I thought of you when I saw it. Your loving mother Lorna read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it under her pillow next to where the cyanide pill used to be. That night she slept better than she had since Daichi died. April arrived with heat and wind and the first blooms in the garden. Tomato flowers, small and yellow, bean blossoms, white and delicate. And on April 12th, the first zinnia opened. It was yellow, bright, and impossible, a circle of petals around a brown center, turning its face toward the sun, like it had every right to exist. Lorna knelt beside it for 10 minutes, just looking. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Takara, the older woman, knelt too, touched one petal with her fingertip. "He would have liked this," she said. "Then we grew it for him. Can you do that? Grow something for the dead?" "Why not? They can't plant anymore. Someone has to do it for them." Takara smiled. Actually smiled. Small and sad, but real. "Then I'll water them. Every day. For Kenji." By late April, the garden was a riot of green. The women spent hours there tending and weeding and watching things grow. It became a kind of meditation, a place where the war felt distant and the work was simple and clean. Guard Calhoun joined them most afternoons, teaching, answering questions through the translator or through gestures when words failed. He had an easy way about him, never rushing, never condescending. Treated them like people who knew things he didn't, which in the case of Natsumi's farming knowledge was absolutely true. "Back home," he told them one afternoon through the translator, "I got a little girl, 8 years old, Ellie. She's growing up without her daddy around much." He paused. "And I got friends with daughters about your age." He nodded at Natsumi. 22, 23. Working in munitions factories. I worry about them every day. Worry they'll blow themselves up making bombs." He said it matter-of-factly, but Lorna heard the fear underneath. This man with the cowboy hat and the easy drawl was a father terrified for his child, just like her mother was terrified for her. War didn't make the fear different, just the uniforms. On April 25th, a man arrived at the camp with cameras and official papers. Harold Jennings, journalist for Life magazine. He was there to document humane treatment of prisoners. Public relations, though they didn't use that term. The women were told to gather by the garden. Nothing forced. Just a request. Would they mind being photographed? To show the American public that prisoners were being treated according to Geneva Conventions. Most agreed. What choice did they have? And besides, the garden looked beautiful. The vegetables were thriving. The zinnias were in full bloom, yellow and orange and red, bursting against the green. They lined up. 18 women in cotton dresses, hair clean and tied back faces that no longer looked like death. The photographer arranged them carefully. Garden in the background, good light, composition. Wyatt and another guard. Thompson stood at the edges of the frame, not looming, just present, part of the story. Lorna ended up in the center between the two men, purely by accident of height and position. She stood there feeling awkward, conscious of the camera, of the performance of it all. The photographer was checking his light meter when Wyatt leaned over slightly, close enough that she could hear him without the translator. He said something in Japanese. His pronunciation was terrible, mangled by his Texas accent, but she understood. Hana, totemo, kirei. Flowers. Very beautiful. He'd been practicing, learning words, and he'd chosen those to say to her now in this moment in her language. Lorna turned to look at him. This tall cowboy with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. This enemy soldier who'd taught her to plant tomatoes and played harmonica through the fence and was trying in his broken Japanese to tell her the flowers were pretty. She smiled, couldn't help it. A real smile, small and genuine and completely unguarded. The camera clicked. That moment, that exact fraction of a second. Lorna, age 28, 102 pounds, standing between two American guards in front of a garden she'd planted, smiling at a simple compliment about flowers. The photographer got his shot. Perfect composition, good light, human interest. "Thank you, folks," he said cheerfully. "That's wonderful, very natural." Lorna turned back to the camera, smile fading. The moment passed. They were dismissed. Everyone went back to their routines. Garden work, dinner, evening. Lorna thought nothing more of it. She didn't know that the photograph would be developed in a darkroom in Houston 3 days later. Didn't know it would be selected for publication. Didn't know it would end up in a file that would be seen by a military attaché in Tokyo. Didn't know that her smile, that simple, genuine expression of human warmth, would be interpreted as betrayal. She just went back to watering the zinnias. That evening, Wyatt played harmonica again. Lorna sang again. The other women gathered to listen. Even the guards stopped their rounds to hear it. Music in the Texas twilight, enemy and ally making something beautiful together. When it finished, Takara came and stood beside Lorna at the window. "I still have my pill," she said quietly. "The cyanide. I never threw it away." "I know. But I'm not going to use it." "I know that too." "How?" Lorna gestured at the garden, dark now but still there, growing, living. "Because you water the yellow ones every morning. You don't do that if you're planning to die." Takara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He would have been 20 this year." "Kenji, my son, 20 years old. He never got to plant a garden, never got to fall in love, never got to do anything except die for a war that lied to him. Then we'll plant for him. We'll live for him. That's all we can do." "Is it enough?" "I don't know, but it's something." They stood together at the window as stars emerged over Texas, the same stars that shone over Japan, over Hiroshima, where Takara's son had died, over Saipan, where Lorna's brother had bled out in her arms, over all the places the war had torn apart. But here, in this strange pocket of peace, the stars were just stars, beautiful and distant and indifferent to human suffering. Lorna touched the window glass. Cool under her fingers. Solid. Real. On the other side, Texas stretched out into darkness. Foreign land. Enemy land. Land that had given her food and shelter and kindness when she'd expected only death. Nothing made sense anymore. Everything she'd been taught had turned out to be wrong, or at least incomplete. Americans weren't monsters. Survival wasn't dishonor. Smiling didn't mean you'd forgotten the dead. It just meant you were still alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. She went to bed that night with the taste of dinner still on her tongue. Chicken and rice and green beans from the garden. Food she'd helped grow. Food that tasted like hope. The cyanide pill was long gone, flushed away weeks ago. But even if she still had it, Lorna knew she wouldn't use it. Not now. Not when the zinnias were blooming and the tomatoes were ripening and there was music in the evenings. Not when there was still so much left to see. Outside her window in the darkness of the Texas night, a photograph was already making its way through military channels. A moment of genuine human connection captured on film. Lorna smiling between two guards, garden blooming behind her, looking for all the world like someone who'd found peace in the middle of war. In 2 weeks, that photograph would reach Tokyo. In 3 weeks, it would be published in internal military briefings. In a month, it would become evidence of psychological warfare. Proof that American kindness was a weapon more dangerous than bullets. But Lorna didn't know any of that yet. For now, she just slept. Dreamless, full, safe. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, she could imagine a world where it might end. Where people could plant gardens and play music and smile at each other without it meaning betrayal. She could imagine surviving. And more than that, she could imagine wanting to. That was the real victory, not the war, not the politics, not the grand strategies and battles that would fill the history books. Just a 28-year-old nurse in Texas sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, dreaming of yellow flowers blooming in ashes. The photograph reached Tokyo on May 18, 1946, 3 weeks after it was taken. 3 weeks during which Lorna lived in blessed ignorance, tending her garden and learning English words and believing for the first time since the war began that maybe survival was possible. The image traveled through official channels. Military attaché to intelligence office to propaganda division. Each person who saw it had the same reaction. Confusion first, then anger, then something closer to fear. A Japanese woman, military nurse, prisoner of war, standing between American guards, smiling. Not a forced smile, not the rictus of someone performing under duress,
A real smile, genuine, unguarded. The smile of someone who'd forgotten even for a second that she was supposed to be suffering.
Colonel Ishikawa held the photograph under his desk lamp and felt something twist in his stomach. He'd spent 4 years crafting propaganda about American barbarity, about the horrors that awaited any Japanese citizen who fell into enemy hands. Torture, starvation, desecration. And here was evidence that it was all lies, or worse. Here was evidence that American kindness was real, that the enemy could be humane, that everything the empire had told its people about the necessity of death before dishonor was built on a foundation of carefully constructed hatred that couldn't survive contact with reality. He called for his adjutant. "Find out everything about this woman. Name, unit, family, where she's from." The information came back within hours. Imperial Army nurse Haruna Yamamoto, age 28, from Kyoto, captured in Okinawa, currently held at Crystal City Internment Camp, Texas. According to the medical reports that had been intercepted, she'd gained from 68 pounds to 102 pounds in 10 weeks. Cause of weight gain: adequate food, medical care, rest. Ishikawa stared at the numbers. 68 pounds. She'd been starving, dying, and the Americans had fed her back to health. He picked up his phone. "Get me the press office." The headline appeared in the Asahi Shimbun internal military circular 2 days later, not for public consumption. This was for officers only, to prepare them for the psychological implications. Shame. Japanese nurse smiles with enemy captors. Gained 34 pounds on American food. The subheading provided details. Former Imperial Army nurse, age 28, photographed smiling between American guards at Crystal City Internment Camp, Texas. Sources confirm she gained from 68 to 102 pounds in 10 weeks on enemy rations. The article was clinical, factual. But between the lines, the message was clear. This is what defeat looks like. This is what happens when our people stop believing in the cause. This is the weapon we cannot defend against. The photograph was circulated. Officers studied it like intelligence, tried to find evidence of coercion, looked for signs that the smile was fake, that the Americans had forced her to pose, that this was all theater. But they couldn't find it. The smile was too real, the body language too relaxed. She looked healthy, happy, alive. That was the worst part. She looked alive. The backlash spread through military channels like fire through dry grass. Within a week, copies of the photograph had reached civilian administrators. Within 2 weeks, it had leaked to families of soldiers still fighting. Within 3 weeks, mothers in Kyoto and Osaka and Tokyo were whispering about it in market lines. "Did you hear a nurse? Captured. They fed her." She smiled. "What does that mean?" "It means everything we've been told is a lie." In Kyoto, at a small house near the river, Lorna's mother received a visit from 2 military police officers. They showed her the photograph, asked if she recognized the woman. She did. Of course she did. That was her daughter, her Haruna, looking healthier than she had in years, wearing glasses, standing in front of flowers, smiling. "Your daughter has disgraced herself," the first officer said. "She has brought shame to your family by collaborating with the enemy." Lorna's mother, a woman who'd survived bombing raids and starvation and the death of her son, looked at the photograph and then at the officers. "My daughter is alive. That is all I care about. She is eating enemy food while Japanese soldiers starve. Then perhaps the war is lost and we should feed our soldiers instead of sending them to die." The officers left, but the damage was done. By the next morning, neighbors knew. By evening, rocks had been thrown through windows. By the end of the week, the Yamamoto family was being shunned. Grocers refused to sell to them. Former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking. Lorna's mother endured it all without comment. She took the photograph and put it in a frame on the mantel. Her daughter, alive, smiling. That was worth any amount of social ostracism. In Crystal City, Lorna knew none of this. June arrived with heat that made the Texas air shimmer. The garden was producing now, real vegetables, tomatoes that hung heavy on vines, beans that needed picking every other day, squash that grew so fast you could almost watch them expand. The women harvested in the early mornings before the heat became unbearable, filled baskets with food they'd planted and tended and grown. Some went to the camp kitchen. Some they were allowed to prepare themselves cooking in the barracks on a small stove. Lorna cut into a tomato she'd grown from seed and felt something close to pride. The flesh was red and firm, seeds in gel pockets, the smell of summer and earth. She sliced it thin, sprinkled it with salt from the kitchen, and ate it standing in the garden. It tasted like life. On June 3rd, the mail arrived with 3 letters for women in the barracks. Thin airmail envelopes with Japanese stamps. They were opened with shaking hands. Natsumi received hers first. From her father. Short. Factual. We are glad you survived. Your mother sends her love. The farm is managing. Another woman, older, married, opened hers and went pale. Read it twice. Then folded it carefully and walked outside without speaking. The whispers came later. Divorce. Her husband couldn't be married to a woman who'd dishonored herself by surviving. The papers had already been filed. The 3rd letter was for Takara. Lorna watched her take it to her bunk, watched her open it slowly, like diffusing a bomb, watched her read, watched her face drain of color, watched her hands begin to shake. Then Takara stood, walked to the bathroom, locked the door. Lorna waited 5 minutes, then followed. Knocked quietly. Takara-san. No answer. Please, let me in. The lock clicked. The door opened. Takara stood there with a piece of paper in one hand and something small and white in the other. The cyanide pill. My son, Takara said. Her voice was perfectly calm, dead calm, the calm of someone who'd made a decision. Kenji. He killed himself on May 15th, hanged himself in his room. He left a note. 1 sentence. My mother is a disgrace. Lorna's breath caught. He was 19 years old. He survived Hiroshima, survived the bomb, the radiation, the fires, lived through all of that. And then he killed himself, because I'm alive and eating, and he thought that made me a traitor. Takara. Don't. Takara held up the pill. I should have taken this in December. I should have died with honor. Then Kenji would still be alive. That's not true. Isn't it? The letter from my sister says everyone in Tokyo knows about us, about the prisoners who are being fed and treated well. They're calling us traitors, collaborators. My son couldn't live with the shame. Lorna took a step forward, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. The war killed your son, not you. The propaganda killed him. The lie that honor means death. You surviving didn't kill him. The poison in his head did. I could have prevented it. I could have. You could have starved yourself, refused medical care, died in December, and proven the propaganda right, that death is better than living. Takara's hand trembled. The pill rolled slightly in her palm. Your son was told a lie, Lorna said quietly, that his mother being alive was shameful. But the real shame is the people who told him that, the people who convinced a 19-year-old boy that his mother's survival was worse than his death. He's gone, because of me. He's gone because of war, because of hatred, because someone convinced him that kindness from an enemy was worse than extinction. Lorna reached out, gently, put her hand over Takara's, over the pill. But you're still here, and maybe that's the real victory. Living, refusing to let them turn us all into corpses. Takara's face crumpled. The pill fell from her hand, bounced on the tile floor, skittered under the sink. She collapsed forward, and Lorna caught her, held her while she sobbed. Great heaving cries that sounded like they were tearing her apart from the inside. They sank to the bathroom floor. Lorna held Takara while she grieved for a son who'd believed the lie. who'd thought his mother's smile in a photograph was worth dying over. When the crying finally stopped, Takara pulled back. Her face was blotchy, swollen, destroyed. "What do I do now?" "You live. You plant yellow flowers. You tell his story so no one else believes the lie." "Will that be enough?" "I don't know, but it's something." They sat there for a long time. Then Takara looked at the pill under the sink, looked at Lorna, made a decision. She crawled over, picked it up, held it over the toilet and dropped it in. Flushed, watched the water swirl and carry it away. "For Kenji," she said. "I'll live for him, since he couldn't." The news about the photograph reached the women 3 days later. Not officially, through whispers, through new letters that arrived with accusations and anger and confusion. "Why did you smile? Don't you know what they're saying about you? How could you betray us like this?" Lorna received a letter from her mother that was different from the others. Short, direct. "They are saying you smiled for the enemy. They showed me the photograph. You look beautiful, healthy, alive. I don't care what anyone says. Smile as much as you want. Just come home." But attached to her mother's letter was a clipping. Someone had included it. Maybe her mother. Maybe someone else. A copy of the military circular, the headline, the photograph. Lorna saw herself for the first time, standing between Wyatt and Thompson, garden behind her, face turned toward Wyatt, smiling. She remembered the moment, the way he'd said the flowers were beautiful in broken Japanese, the surprise of it, the kindness. But she could see how it looked, could see how someone in Tokyo, someone who'd lost everything, someone who'd been told for years that Americans were monsters, would interpret that smile. Betrayal, collaboration, dishonor. That night, Guard Calhoun found her sitting by the fence looking at the photograph. "You all right, Lorna?" She held up the clipping. "This. Problem. Big problem." He took it, studied it. His face darkened as he read the headline, even though he couldn't read Japanese. The tone was clear enough. "They're giving you hell for this. They say, I am shame. I am..." She struggled for the English word. "Betray. Betray Japan." Wyatt handed the clipping back, sat down on the ground next to the fence, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "Can I tell you something, Lorna?" She nodded. "That photograph, that smile, that's the most honest thing I've seen in 4 years of this damn war. You weren't performing, you weren't pretending, you were just being human for a second. And if that's betrayal, then maybe betrayal is the sanest thing a person can do." She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the tone, understood that he thought she'd done nothing wrong. "My daughter," he continued. "Ellie. She's why I keep this job. Could have gone to the front. Could have fought. But someone's got to guard the prisoners, and I figured I'd rather do that than kill people. You know why?" Lorna shook her head. "Because I want Ellie to grow up in a world where people smile at each other. Even across fences. Even across wars. Even when every damn thing tells them they should hate each other instead." He pulled out his harmonica, turned it over in his hands. "You want to know a secret? That night we played music together. That's the first time I felt human in 3 years. First time I remembered why any of this matters. So, if they want to call that betrayal, let them. I call it hope." He started playing, same melody as before. Red River Valley. Slow and mournful and beautiful. Lorna listened, and then quietly she sang. Sakura, Sakura. Different words, same feeling. By the time they finished, a dozen women had gathered to listen. Guards, too. Nobody said anything. Just let the music exist in the space between enemy and ally, between prisoner and captor, between hatred and its opposite. When it ended, Wyatt stood, tipped his hat. "Whatever they say about you back home, Lorna, you remember this. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Takes more courage to stay human in war than to die. Don't let them convince you otherwise." He walked away. Lorna sat there holding the photograph, looking at her own smile, trying to decide if it was shame or hope, or maybe both at once. July brought the announcement everyone had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Repatriation. They would be sent home, all prisoners of war, returned to Japan. The war was over. They'd lost, and now they got to go back and face what defeat looked like. The women had mixed reactions: joy at the thought of seeing family, terror at what awaited them. They'd all received letters by now. All knew the whispers: traitors, collaborators, women who'd eaten enemy food and smiled for cameras and forgotten their duty to die. Lorna lay in bed the night after the announcement and thought about Kyoto, about her mother, about facing neighbors who'd seen the photograph, about trying to explain that survival wasn't betrayal. She got up, found paper and a pencil, wrote a letter she had no intention of sending. Dear Mr. Calhoun, I am writing this in English because you taught me the words. I am writing this for myself because some things need to be said even if no one hears them. You did not win my loyalty. You gave me back my name. When I arrived at Crystal City, I was POW247, a number, a failure, a woman who should have died but didn't. I was 68 pounds and I had a poison pill in my mouth and I was ready to bite down. You called me Lorna, like I was a person, like my name mattered. You gave me bacon when I expected bullets, glasses when I expected blindness, seeds when I expected barbed wire, music when I expected silence. The war lied to me about everything, told me Americans were monsters, told me death was honor, told me survival was shame. But you told the truth without saying a word. You showed me that enemies could be kind, that defeat didn't have to mean destruction. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is plant a garden and see what grows. I'm going home now, to a country that will hate me for living, for eating your food, for smiling in that photograph. They will call me a traitor. Maybe they're right. Maybe choosing to live instead of die is the ultimate betrayal. But I don't care anymore. I will plant zinnias in Kyoto, yellow ones, for all the people who didn't make it, for my brother Daichi, for Takara's son Kenji, for everyone the war consumed. And maybe those flowers will bloom in the ashes. Maybe they'll remind people that life is possible even after everything burns down. Thank you for the music. Thank you for the seeds. Thank you for treating me like a human being when everyone else had forgotten I was one. I will remember this, all of it. The bacon, the glasses, the harmonica, the smile, especially the smile. With gratitude, Lorna Haruna Yamamoto. She folded the letter, put it in an envelope, wrote his name on the front, then tucked it into her bag. She'd give it to him. Maybe, or maybe she'd keep it forever. A record of the time she'd learned that kindness could exist anywhere, even in the heart of war. The last 2 weeks at Crystal City passed in a blur. Final harvests from the garden. The zinnias were still blooming bright and defiant against the Texas heat. The women picked the flowers, pressed some between pages of books to take home. On July 28th, their last full day, Wyatt came to the garden one final time. He carried a small cloth bag. "Lorna," he called. She straightened from weeding, wiped her hands on her dress. He held out the bag. Seeds, for Japan, zinnias, same ones Ellie grows. She took it. The bag was warm from his pocket. She could feel the seeds inside, small and hard and full of potential. "Plant these," he said slowly, using the English words he'd taught her over months. "Make. Beautiful." She nodded, couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Then Wyatt did something that surprised them both. He spoke in Japanese. The pronunciation was terrible, mangled by his accent, but the meaning was clear. "Sensu, warui, hito, I." War. Bad. People. Good. 4 words. Months of practice to get them right. He'd been learning, preparing for this goodbye. Lorna's eyes filled with tears. She bowed, deep, the formal bow of profound gratitude. When she straightened, she said in English, "Thank you for everything. I will remember." They stood there for a moment, prisoner and guard, enemy and what friend felt too small? Ali felt too political. Maybe just two people who'd found humanity in an inhumane situation. Wyatt tipped his hat, turned to go, then stopped, looked back. "Lorna, that photograph. The one they're all angry about, I'm glad it exists. 40 years from now, when people ask what the war was like, I'm going to show them that picture. Going to tell them that even in the worst of it, people could still smile at each other. That's worth remembering." He walked away. Lorna clutched the bag of seeds and cried. August 12th, 1946, the day of departure. 18 women lined up for the trucks that would take them to the ship, to the Pacific, to Japan, to whatever waited on the other side. Lorna wore the glasses Dr. Grayson had given her, carried the seeds Wyatt had provided, had the letter to him tucked in her bag, still unsent, still private. Before they left, Dr. Grayson called her aside one last time, handed her a piece of paper. "Your medical record, in case you need it." She looked at the paper, saw the numbers. December the 12th, 1945, 68 pounds. February the 20th, 1946, 102 pounds. A chart of her survival in pounds and dates. "You made it," he said simply, "all the way back. I'm proud of you." She bowed to him too. "Thank you. You saved my life." "No, Lorna. You saved your own life. I just gave you the tools." The truck engines started. Time to go. Lorna climbed into the back with the others. The canvas flap came down. The truck rolled forward, through the camp gates, onto Texas roads, toward the coast. She didn't look back. Couldn't. If she looked back, she might not be able to leave. The journey home took 3 weeks. Ship across the Pacific, processing in Yokohama, trains to various cities. When Lorna finally reached Kyoto on September 3rd, her mother was waiting at the station. Older, thinner, but alive. They embraced without words, held each other while people stared and whispered. The nurse who smiled for the enemy, the woman who ate while soldiers starved. The traitor. Lorna's mother pulled back, looked at her daughter's face, at the glasses, at the healthy color in her cheeks. "You're alive," she said simply. "That's all that matters." They went home. The house was the same, smaller than Lorna remembered, but standing. The cherry tree in the garden had survived the war. Its branches were empty now, autumn approaching, but it was alive. The neighbors avoided them. Former friends crossed the street. At the market, vendors charged them double or refused to sell at all. Lorna endured it with the same patience she'd learned in Texas. She unpacked her bag, took out the seeds, the letter to Wyatt, the photograph. In late September, she planted the zinnias in the small plot behind the house, pushed each seed into the soil with the same care she'd used in Crystal City, watered them, waited. The neighbors watched, muttered. A few threw stones over the fence when they thought no one was looking. But Lorna kept watering, kept waiting. And in October, impossible in the cooling weather, the first zinnia bloomed. Yellow, bright, defiant. More followed. Yellow, orange, red. A riot of color in a city still grey with ash and defeat. People came to look, couldn't help themselves. Flowers were rare. Beauty was scarce. And here in the garden of the woman they'd shunned life was blooming. Slowly, so slowly, Lorna barely noticed the stones stopped coming. The whispers changed tone. Instead of traitor, she heard the nurse with the flowers. Instead of crossing the street, neighbors nodded. Brief, grudging, but acknowledgement. Lorna didn't work as a nurse at first. No hospital would hire her, but she tended her garden. And when neighborhood children got sick, their parents started coming to her door, quietly, shamefully, asking for help. She never refused. By 1947, she was running an informal clinic from her home. By 1950, she'd saved enough to rent a small building. By 1955, the clinic had expanded. She never married, never had children of her own. But she saved 37 orphaned children over the years and treated hundreds more in her clinic. Treated them for free or for whatever they could pay. Rice, vegetables, labor. And every spring she planted zinnias, yellow ones especially. For Daichi, for Kenji, for all the boys who never got to see flowers bloom. People asked her sometimes about the war, about Texas, about the photograph. She always said the same thing. I learned that kindness is possible anywhere, even from enemies, even in darkness. In 1982, at age 65, Lorna was diagnosed with lung cancer, radiation exposure. She'd been in Nagasaki 3 days after the bomb fell, helping with relief efforts. The poison had been working in her cells for 37 years. She declined aggressive treatment. I've lived enough, she told her doctors. More than I expected to. She spent her final years organizing her papers, writing down stories, trying to make sense of a life that had spanned from Imperial Japan to defeat to rebuilding. On March 7th, 1985, knowing the end was close, Lorna wrote one last letter. To whoever finds this, I was once 68 pounds and wanted to die with a cyanide pill in my mouth. I thought survival was shame. I thought death was honor. I thought enemies could only be monsters. Then a cowboy gave me zinnia seeds. A doctor gave me eyeglasses. A country I was taught to hate gave me bacon and kindness and a reason to keep breathing. I smiled once in a photograph. Tokyo called it betrayal. I call it the day I remembered I was human. I lived 39 more years after that smile. Saved 37 orphaned children. Planted zinnias every spring. Learned that the war lied to me about everything except one thing, that in the end we're all just people trying to survive. The bacon I ate on December 13th, 1945, weighed more than shame. It weighed the same as hope. Plant zinnias. They bloom even in ashes, especially in ashes. Haruna Yamamoto. Lorna, March 1985. She died 2 days later, age 68, surrounded by former patients and the children of former patients. Her funeral was attended by 300 people. They buried her beneath the cherry tree in her mother's garden. And on her grave they planted zinnias, yellow ones. For 39 years those flowers bloomed every spring. The garden became a small landmark. People would visit, leave offerings, plant more flowers. And then in November 2024, something unexpected happened. Dr. Rebecca Whitmore, archival historian at the University of Texas, was cataloging materials from Crystal City internment camp. The facility had closed decades ago, but boxes of records remained in storage. Most were routine: prisoner logs, medical files, correspondence. But in one box, water-damaged and forgotten, she found something different. A photograph, black and white, slightly faded. A Japanese woman in a cotton dress, standing between two guards, garden behind her, smiling. Beneath it, a letter, handwritten, never sent. Dear Mr. Calhoun, you did not win my loyalty, you gave me back my name. Dr. Whitmore read the entire letter, then the medical file that was with it. 68 pounds to 102 pounds in 10 weeks. Then the photograph again, looking at that smile with new understanding. She posted it online. Twitter first, then TikTok, then everywhere. The caption was simple. Crystal City 1946. A Japanese POW nurse, starved to 68 pounds, was given food glasses and kindness by American guards. She smiled. Tokyo called it treason. She called it humanity. Her letter was just found. Thread. The story went viral. 8 million views in 48 hours. Comments flooded in from around the world. but especially from American men in their 60s and 70s, men old enough to remember fathers and uncles who'd fought, who'd guarded, who'd come home and never talked about the war. The top comment with 127,000 likes read, "My uncle was a guard at Crystal City, never spoke about it. Before he died, he told me we weren't heroes. We just fed people who were hungry. That should be normal, not heroic. Now I understand." Another, "I'm 71 years old. That bacon scene in the article made me cry." We forget what winning really looked like. Not medals, not territory. Food, dignity, glasses so someone could see. That's victory. Another, "She weighed 68 pounds. My granddaughter weighs 102 at age 12. Jesus Christ, we really did starve them, didn't we? And then we fed them. And that's supposed to be controversial. What kind of war was this?" The story spread. News outlets picked it up. Documentarians requested interviews. The letter was translated into 16 languages. In Kyoto, at a small house near the river, Lorna's great-niece read the story on her phone. Then she went to the garden, to the grave beneath the cherry tree, to the zinnias that still bloomed every spring. She took a photograph, posted it. "My great-aunt Haruna, she saved 37 children, planted flowers every year, lived to 68. The war tried to kill her. Kindness saved her. Here are her zinnias, still blooming." That photograph got 5 million views. And suddenly Lorna's smile wasn't controversial anymore. It was evidence. Proof that even in the darkest moments humanity could survive. That bacon and glasses and music could be more powerful than bombs. That the enemy could feed you and it wouldn't make you a traitor. It would just make you alive. The story continues to spread. Students study it, teachers use it, veterans read it and cry, remembering moments they'd buried for decades. And every spring in Kyoto, the zinnias bloom, yellow, orange, red, bright and defiant and beautiful. Someone tends them, always. The great-niece now, but someday her children, then their children. Because Lorna was right. Flowers bloom even in ashes, especially in ashes. And sometimes a smile in a photograph can change the world more than any battle ever could. The letter sits in a museum now, temperature-controlled, protected, available for anyone to read. The words of a woman who weighed 68 pounds and chose to live. Who ate bacon and felt guilty and kept eating anyway. Who smiled at a cowboy and paid for it with shame and never regretted it. "You did not win my loyalty. You gave me back my name." Those words echo across 80 years, a reminder that war is complex, that enemies are human, that kindness is never wasted, that survival is not betrayal, that bacon weighed more than shame. It weighed the same as hope. And in the end, hope is what survives when everything else burns down. Hope and zinnias, and the memory of a smile that refused to be erased.